the Earth, and possibly on another side note, a cliff note here, that there could be entrances to Hollow Earth at that point. And he obviously knew some information, then that's why he went there and was,
There's also a Project Monarch, a Project Monarch facility at Shasta as well. Mm-hmm.
Now, my father and my mother both have told me stories about bases that they had been to. My father had been to a base that actually, he said, I could have this wrong, but as I remember, he said that it had a Mormon church on it with a golden, how they top their can't think of the word here. Their buildings, church, they top it with gold.
Right.
And my dad is very, very intuitive and very capable of putting pieces of puzzles together, as am I, and that's how I've gotten to this point, by putting the pieces together. And he is also very good with making free energy and using magnetics and things like this. He was involved in a lot of that, and he told me that something I didn't know, that gold is the most conductive metal known to man. Is this correct?
Yes, that is correct, because in fact, I was just having a conversation with a gentleman that I met last night that is friends with a friend that I'm visiting right now. Very, very fascinating gentleman, and I'm hoping to have another conversation with him, because I was just sharing with him the uniqueness, this is the way I describe it, the uniqueness I have around water, specifically salt water. And he became very fascinated, and he brought up something that I haven't thought about in a long time, the fact that seawater actually has a high concentration, but I think it's in the parts per billion of gold per cubic foot of seawater. And he was relating that because he was doing a psychic reading on me, that this ability of me being able to use water as a medium for certain abilities that I have discovered that I have, and that was part of the reason why I was chosen for the project I was in. I find it interesting because he said, well, he had mentioned how gold is, so conductive, and that, there is this high concentration of gold, even though it's in the parts per million, but still high in that level in seawater. And he was really helping putting some pieces together with me. So yes, that is absolute. On top of it, let me just add this. There are, I've heard this, and I can't remember who I heard talk about this, and maybe my friend who's sitting here knows the name, but there is an individual who had shared about how Shasta, there's said that Shasta has a large storage area where gold is being stored. And the gold is being stored in here because there's an ET group that the Mormons are connected with. That am I on the right track? Yes, my friend is shaking her head. Yes,
I'm shaking my head and agreeing with you at the same time.
The gold is taken off-world, but it's not every year. We're talking like decades and decades of the gold being compiled, and it's taken off-world because it's used for very many advanced technological things off-world by this ET race that actually the Mormons have close connection with.
And that goes into some of, I think, William Bramley's work in the Gods of Eden, and also the guy, Zachariah Sitchin, the guy that Jordan Maxwell had brought to America to talk about some of this stuff.
Yes, and I believe that it's discussed, the subject was discussed in that book, The Gods of Eden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had mentioned to you before we did the show about a new documentary that's out called The Pyramid Code, and I had told my dad, I had reminded my dad that the pyramids were capped with gold, and these extraterrestrial. I had an Egyptian doctor who delivered my daughter, and I asked him point blank. He's Egyptian. I asked him where the pyramids come from. He said from extraterrestrials. Straight right in front of his assistant and my wife and me, not knowing who I am or what my background is and what I cover, and he just straight blunt said it to me. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to get you this documentary then called The Pyramid Code, because I think you need to watch it, because that is exactly it. You hit the nail on the head when you bring in the Mormon Church and you bring in the gold, and it's been said that in Fort Knox that it's even possible that all the gold that is there is actually plated and it's not even real. It's just really there for looks.
Fort Knox is nothing more than a smoke screen. It's nothing more than a smoke screen. Yes, and you're on the right track there. And on top of it, just to go back to what you said about the Egyptian doctor, there are quite a few cultures around the world where extraterrestrials are very much part of not just the history, but the religion and the spirituality and the way of life. Let's look at case in point with Egypt. A lot of the Egyptians, you walk into Cairo, you walk up to the average local. If you mention this, they're going to say yes. Mexico, that is a global hotspot for extraterrestrials. Puerto Rico, the same way. Well, Puerto Rico because of the base that's really just right there. But in Tibet, and there's a great documentary. I can't remember the name of it. I'll find it and I'll send it to you about the whole culture about the Tibetans. And really, there is a Stargate there in Tibet that they have protected and they've sworn to protect for hundreds of years. Also, India. India is probably the most open-minded country, in my opinion, in the world because there's a very large percentage of the people in India who absolutely know that ETs are real, that they've been around, that they've had the influence, that there's the good ones and the bad ones. But we live in the socialist United States of the global elite where the mind control is so thick and pungent that they have taken they've taken it all away, any ability to have an open mind. That's why shows like yours are so important. That's why shows like Rebecca Jernigan's and Project Camelot and Kevin Smith show and Otherworld Radio, and the list goes on and on. That's why these shows are so important because, we are going against the grain, but the only way we're going to succeed is to go against the grain.
Freedom to Fascism, Aaron Rousseau. That movie really turned me on to a lot of this information. I said, wait a minute, what is going on? And you touched on the Mayans and some of these Mexican cultures, and I just wanted to know if you were familiar with the story of the Nephilim and possibly them being the gods of the Mayan or the Inca, in which they said that their gods were of long, light-colored hair and blue eyes, which represents the Celtic background and the Nephilim possibility.
I'm familiar with some of that, but there's also some research being done and some accounts and some documentaries I've even seen where the Nephilims, it is said, and this is a hypothesis of some researchers, that the Nephilims also had a part in building the pyramids.
Definitely.
But not as not as the architects, not as the designers, but really as more of the ground level of the more working at the level of the grunts, more of the ground pounder level. But I have to say this information correlates a lot with the guest I was supposed to have on last night, and unfortunately that show didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. But when you talk about ancient Tibet and you talk about extraterrestrials and you talk about, he was telling me about the son of Tibet that Dr. Lowe has. I don't know who Dr. Lowe is, but apparently he has this golden skull that's been x-rayed that has engravings on the inside. And what he was telling me about all these sacred skulls and this pyramid that's supposed to be built down in Guatemala, and a lot of the information we talk about resonates with me, that his information is coming from a light energy source, and he's in contact with a lot of these things, and he's had a lot of the experiences that Miriam Delicado had. And when I sent him that video, it really touched him in a way when that song came on that I included in the video, the song by John Lennon, Imagine. It really got to him. And I have to say, my personal opinion is he was frightened. He was asking me if I was, I don't know if I should be saying this on air without his opinion. I mean, his grace. But basically, I won't say it. But basically, he was a little intimidated by the show that I had on with you and Deagle, and he was a little unsure of himself, and he's been going through a lot of shedding
and he has